Hello, romantics. I'm Sarah Gomez, author, romance lover, and host. You're listening to Romancing the Story, a podcast centered around writing, reading, and story structure, all with a twist of romance. We're at episode 64, and on today's episode, I speak with author and writing coach Dr. Nicole Janz about approaching writer's block, overcoming procrastination, and the dreaded imposter syndrome. We also discuss the causes of procrastination, avoiding burnout, and how to figure out the real cause of our writing blocks. I even admit to my shortcomings as an author in this episode and what I'm doing to help mitigate those issues to keep my story moving forward. It was such a wonderful, enlightening discussion, and I'm so glad I was able to chat with Dr. Janz. Something she mentioned that resonated with me was that most of the time, we are doing the right things for our writing. We just need to remember what we do well and let it carry us forward. If you enjoy our discussion, I highly recommend checking out Nicole's new book that was just released. It's called The Right Habit Planner and Workbook, and it aims to help writers set better goals, optimize flow, and write daily with ease. Links to connect to Nicole, find her book, as well as other media mentioned, will be listed in the episode description. Perfect timing for NaNoWriMo. Speaking of which, if you're in the midst of NaNoWriMo, like me, don't forget to check out other nano-related episodes. I have curated a list in the description for topics that are relevant for NaNoWriMo, so I hope you get a chance to enjoy those as well. With that said, let's jump right in. Welcome, writing coach and author, Dr. Nicole Janz. Yay!
Welcome. Hi, nice to be here.
Oh, it's so lovely to have you. Since we're right into the first part of November, I'm really excited to have you on because this is perfect timing to have a writing coach as part of the podcast. So in case listeners don't know, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and your writing?
So, I'm Nicole, and I used to be a journalist. I used to be an academic, and now I'm a writer's coach and writer. So I've sort of pivoted around the thing that I love the most, which is writing in different ways. But I feel like I found my sweet spot now, where I'm helping writers to overcome their blocks and craft their stories, to write books and articles. But also now that gives me a lot of extra time to write my own poetry, my fragmented novel, and all kinds of other things that I do purely for fun and enjoyment.
So how do you get started into being a writing coach? Since you took a turn from a journalist to now you're helping authors.
You know what? I really stumbled into it. I sort of, looking back, it's easy to construct a story, but when you're in the middle, you don't really see it. I've always enjoyed and loved the writing itself, but I really also loved connecting with people and seeing where they are blocked. I would talk to colleagues or students, and sort of at some point I started running writing retreats in COVID lockdowns. No one could go and meet anyone. So I had these online writing retreats, and I realized that most of the time in the coffee breaks, people would start talking to me about why they're blocked, right? In the writing time, they would write, but then in the break, it would be quite, the emotions would come up. And I realized that actually within a few minutes, just by asking a few intuitive questions, I could get them out of block so that they are ready for the next writing session and don't feel blocked anymore. And sort of, I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I just said, well, anyone who's interested, I'm offering writing coaching just to see. And actually that took off massively, because that was sort of the thing that I think I do best. Yeah, but totally by accident, really.
How helpful is that? Because I know I get like that too. I get kind of in the middle of something, or I'm so spent on putting my energy elsewhere. I have my full 9 to 5 job. And sometimes when I do have time to sit down and actually do my creative writing, I feel totally stuck. I'm I don't know where to go from here. Like, I know it's in my head. How do I translate it onto my paper?
It's often quite big in the head, and we need that teeny tiny step, that little bridge to sort of get into the writing mode from whatever it was the day job was. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's why I'm so glad to have you on the podcast today, because we have NaNoWriMo has just kind of kicked off. And I think that's the big, National Novel Writing Month. All the writers want to be like, okay, I want to get those words on the page. And often I think we start out really excited and we're like, all right, I'm going to hit it full force. And then as we get on through the month, it's like the middle part is what gets the hardest, I think, or at least for me. That's really the hard part. Like, I have like the first week, I'm like, I'm really hitting those goals. But then as I get into it, I'm like, I don't know where to go right now. I'm just kind of like floundering. Being on both sides of it as both the writing coach and, you just released a book. Speaking of which, yourself, congrats. The
Thank
planner.
you.
When I took a poll from my audience and kind of asked, okay, you have a writing coach, what would you like to hear from our episode? And it was kind of a tie between writer's block and procrastination. So since you have experience with both, how do you approach writer's block?
Yes, I love that question. I don't love writer's block, but I love that question. And I think writer's block is really misunderstood. We sort of, there's this myth that there's this invisible illness floating around that might hit you at any time. And once it hits you, you're paralyzed and you cannot write and you can't get out of it and everything is completely awful, right? And that's why writer's block is seen as a failure. Like, please don't give me writer's block. It's the enemy. And actually, I think we need to see writer's block in a different way. It's really not the enemy, but I think it's a sign. And usually it's that your body and your mind are telling you something is off. It might be something is off with your writing or something is off with your life. And writer's block on purpose, forces you to pause. That's sort of the definition of you need to block and pause, right? And it's a bit uncomfortable, but it's your chance to stop and think about what might be going on. Where are you going wrong? And so this is like the biggest thing I want everyone to know who's listening. The secret is not to try and avoid writer's block at all cost, but it's to change your relationship with writer's block. Instead of fearing it, when it's there, embrace it and see what you can learn from it. So that is sort of like the biggest message that I have that might change already all that fear and worry that you have that writer's block might come your way.
That's a really interesting approach. I like that because you are right. When I get writer's block, I do dread it. And it's one of those things of like, I feel like there's such a negative emotion attached to it that when I try to fight it, it makes it worse.
It's almost, it's the same with anxiety. I suffer from
Mm.
anxiety and panic attacks, and I can totally see the parallel. If I try not to be anxious and worry about not getting anxious, sure as hell, I'm going to get a panic attack. But if I think about it in a different way, just as with writer's block, suddenly I can just let go a little bit and just see what emerges from that space that I'm creating.
That's a really great way to look at it. That is so true because I know friends and family who have like struggle with anxiety themselves. And whenever you're like, okay, I'm making a conscious effort not to think about it. That's all you want to think about. So when you're in it, when you try to associate a better, like I'm trying to embrace the writer's block, what does that look like? Or in the way you think about it, how does it look like when you talk to writers or when you go about writing?
So luckily, it's always easier with a coach, but you can also diagnose your writer's block yourself. And I have a journaling exercise that I can take you through that is very easy and that I do with all my clients. And the first and most simple step is just journaling about which project are you stuck with? Where exactly was the point when you stopped writing and started worrying? And that is something that needs to be written down just to see it on paper, because otherwise there's this fuzzy thought, I'm blocked, but at some point you don't even remember anymore. What are you blocked with? Which part of the chapter or which, where were you in your life? What happened in your life when you had to stop? So that's sort of just taking stock, journaling. Next step would be to think about how bad is it? Because when we slip into writer's block, the alarm bell goes on and it feels like from 0 to 100 awful. But often, if we think about when was the last time we've written, maybe actually 2 weeks ago, we did still write. So it's often not as bad as it sort of appears in the catastrophizing thoughts. So that's step number 2, just like write down how bad is it. You can even give yourself a score from 1 to 10 and be really honest. Step number 3 is openness and awareness. That's a bit sort of mindful and meditative, but often I ask my clients, where in your body can you feel your block? And most people feel it in their neck, like tension in their neck, the chest gets really tight, or a constant stomach ache. And so we want to sort of acknowledge that there is something going on in the body where this block, if you've been having it for a while, might be manifesting. And just what I do is just say, well, lay your hand on that area and just take a deep breath and just tell your writer's block, I'm listening. I'm here. I'm listening. What do you want to tell me? Because then you've calmed your nervous system. You've gotten out of the worry thoughts and you're just here in the present moment. And I'm very sure that some thought will come up. I mean, I know like a million different ways of what you can do and what might be the reasons. But I think creating that listening space, which is step number 3, and acknowledging what's going on in your body, that is the golden ticket. This is how you change the relationship, because you're not fending it off. You're present with it. And it's probably going to be uncomfortable, to be honest, but you're here and you're open.
That's something I've kind of been trying to be more mindful of, is like, I notice when I'm calm and try to say, okay, what's really wrong here? I feel like I have such a more clear perspective as opposed to if I approach it and I'm just frustrated, because then I'm just trying to fix the issue, but not only the symptom, not the real cause of what's deep down, like you said.
100%. Because when you're out of that sort of stress moment or the frustration or the sort of forcing it energy, suddenly you can think more clearly, and then you can actually start diagnosing yourself, and you can go through different options. I think there are at least 12 potential ways why, or reasons why you might have block and how to get out of them. And you can sort of mentally go through and check which of these might be at work. Does your body need a break? Are you really just, on the verge of burnout? Or do you need to go and live and gather some inspiration? Or do you not believe in the project anymore? Or do you need to think it through? Like, do you need a brainstorm session with a friend? And so there are, many more of those ideas of tiny steps that could get you out of it. And I've put them all in the Right Habit Planner for people. Just, you can almost like tick this off, but you can really only think it through when you've calmed your nervous system and when you're present in the moment.
And then that's also like you said, something available in your planner. So if writers want to go check that out, that's something that they can utilize and put just in their writer's tool belt to have. I've spoken at length on the podcast with our mutual friend, Catherine McClatchy, who introduced us. Lovely. And we've talked about like setting realistic, achievable goals. And that I've kind of utilized that to kind of work within my season of life. And I'm working to implement them more into my writing as well. So there are different strategies that work for every writer. Like you said, there's like 12 different reasons, right? Like 12 different kind of pieces that you could figure out why you're getting writer's block. So what are some strategies or techniques that you find help challenge and support writers so they can get back into the flow of writing?
Once you've diagnosed your block, obviously it'll depend on what you found out. And I would only say, just take one tiny step. It doesn't always have to be, I need to, find the best office in my house, or like buy this or that, or go on a course or whatever. Sometimes you really just need to take a Post-it and write down 3 teeny tiny goals that you can do in 10 minutes that correspond to that issue that you think you may have, right? So often it's just, my to-go-to question is, what's your next tiny step? And it sounds banal, but putting the word tiny helps people to let go of, I need to battle the writer's block with a big weapon, but just what is something small you can do? And for everyone, that'll be something slightly different. I wonder what it was for you, or when you have that, would you share that if there's a little to-go-to thing that changes things for you to get back into the flow?
for me, I know like little triggers, like it kind of to like signal that this is my time for writing. So, like, I usually have a notepad. Like, I just like something tactile. Like, I like to
Mhm.
have like pencils or pens nearby me. I have a fun little notepad that's just mine for writing, and that's all I use it for. And I may not use it at all, but I know that's my signal for, okay, now it's time to sit down and just write. And this is my time. So, like, that's kind of like a trigger that we had kind of talked through as far as like that's something I'm trying to utilize more in my writing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would advise. Yeah, so you've done it,
Yay.
perfectly. I gave that thing a name. I call it flow ritual. But it's really exactly what you're saying. And anyone can try that out because you're sort of trying to rewire your brain. You're trying to train your brain to know it's writing time. And I'm very big on bringing body and mind together. So usually when I work with clients, I say, well, write down 3 things that help your body relax. Maybe a scented candle and taking 3 breaths, or doing a very quick mini yoga session, or just jumping up and down. And then write down 3 things that help your mind. It might be turning off your phone. It might be putting on binaural beat music or your favorite playlist. So anything for the mind, or close all your other browser windows so that your mind doesn't get distracted. And then often they have a list of things that are good for their body to calm and be spacious, and for their mind to be not distracted. And then I say, well, just pick one of each. Don't make it complicated. And it could be having your favorite coffee drink and turning on a playlist. And if you do that each time before you're sitting down to write, you are applying your flow ritual and you're telling your brain it's writing time. And that is simple. And you just need to explore a little bit what works for you. And as you already do with your notebook and your pen, you do that every single time. And that is just, it makes everything more automatic. You don't have to jump over a hurdle to sit down and write.
That's kind of what we figured out too, is that just make it uncomplicated and easy, because the more I have to work at it, the less likely I am to do it.
Yeah, no one wants writing to be a complicated thing. It's meant to be simple, creative, and just letting things flow, rather than anything that's forced and complicated is just off-putting. And no wonder would people get frustrated, because there are often all these productivity hacks and all the self-help books, and I have them all on my shelf too. But sometimes that's just too much, right? I'd rather work with 2 prompts, one simple tool, as you say, open the notebook in the morning and just go and write.
And plus, I don't know about you, but I can always tell in my writing when I've been like, it just feels like I'm fighting for every word on the page. I could tell reading it. And I feel like I know I need to write, especially like we were talking about when I sit down with that notebook. But sometimes, like I was saying, I struggle to sit down in the chair and just do it. And I think that's a shared experience for a lot of writers, that we sometimes like just struggle to get the words on the page, and then we get a little distraction here and there. Like, like we get out of the flow, we get out of our routine, and then all of a sudden, the kid needs our help, or, it's time to make dinner or anything like that. What do you think causes procrastination?
Oh, I've thought about this for a long time. And basically every single writer I work with, I don't just help on the story. I also help on just like being a sort of like therapist, right? Everyone has procrastination tendencies. And I think it's, for me, what I've seen in all the writers and their own sort of individual varieties, is that it's pain avoidance. Procrastination is pain avoidance, because that pain that you feel when you want to write, but maybe you think it's not good enough, that's usually the big one, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not good enough. My writing isn't good enough. Someone's going to see it. I'm not fast enough, especially in NaNoWriMo. Everyone else is probably very productive, and you think, oh, why am I lagging behind? I'm doing something wrong. So all these negative thoughts, when you bring that pain and frustration and worry, when you associate that with writing, suddenly all that creative space just goes poof, and you're just concentrating on the pain. And, just like with writer's block, which is also sort of, it can be quite painful. It's the same with procrastination. So I think the trick is you want to reframe your thinking. Like, is it really true that you're not good enough? Technically, we know that it's okay to have a shitty first draft, but sort of journaling about, is it 100% inevitable that I am going to produce the worst product ever and everyone's going to hate it? Most of the time when I ask a writer that, they start smiling and say, well, no. And then I might ask, what would be a more helpful thought about your writing? And sometimes that's something about, well, I can write something that's decent, and then later I will edit and refine it. And suddenly all that pain that you associate with writing is turned into some gentleness, self-compassion, self-kindness. And it's just so much easier to write from that different place than writing from pain and fear and worry and stress.
That's like probably the single biggest thing that I found has been so helpful for my writing is giving myself that permission to be terrible. And I know it sounds silly, but it works so well for me because, like you said, I go into it thinking this is not going to be my best, but I can't edit a blank page. I have to do something. Something has to get on the page. And whether it ends up in the final draft or not, it'll at least get my thoughts down in a way that is measurable so that I can actually do something with that. It is a struggle. And I think you're right. It is the pain avoidance piece in us, that imposter syndrome that gets in our head quite a bit. I heard someone say something very enlightening one time, that it sometimes isn't just the fear of failure, but also the fear of success, which I thought was really incredible. Because I was like, yeah, I think, because I don't think I'm never afraid to fail so much, but I think I am afraid to succeed, which is kind of the opposite, I think, of what we think at times.
What do you think is the next thought? Like, if you were to succeed with your writing, what would be the next thing that you're fearing after that?
I'm not quite sure. I think it's just what that could mean, because then if I'm successful, then I guess my family and all my friends would want to read my writing, and I care most about their opinions. I would love to share my stories with the world, but at the same time, like, I know not everyone's going to want to read my book, but if I have some success with it, my mom would be very proud and she'd want to share it with everybody. And then everybody's going to, like, a lot of people are going to want to read my books, and I don't know what they're going to think.
I think there's sometimes it's a little bit to do with imposter, like, is it going to be good enough? But also just a lot of writers, especially women writers or identifying as women writers that I work with, they need to acknowledge that I am worthy to be seen as an author and as a creative person, and just detaching from that idea of how good is it going to be, but just no matter how good it is, you are worthy to be seen. And I find it really hard for myself. Like, I need to tell myself that constantly and get into a calm mind space to remember that, because where wouldn't we be? All our stories and expertise and all the things we have to say, they are not here to impress. Really, they are here to connect to another human being. At least that's sort of why I'm writing, and most of the people I work with, writing to connect with others and give them something they might enjoy, or that helps them emotionally, or just helps them to escape from, their daily life. And it's really just about human connection. And when I reframe it as that, you are worthy to be seen, you are worthy to connect to another human being, I find it a little bit easier to not get caught up in these thoughts.
That is a lovely way to approach it, because that's something I'm still learning to navigate through. But I think you're right. As a woman, sometimes we're like, you have to be demure, you have to be, smaller. And sometimes we don't feel like we should amplify our voice. And I think somewhere that's still sometimes ingrained in us. And I know that's definitely still ingrained in me. And I'm slowly learning to unpack that and be a little more out there with my writing and be more vocal about it. As a writing coach, do you think parts of writing can trigger pain avoidance? And can we help mitigate that? For example, like, my biggest one is always staring at a blank page. Like, my poor kiddo was facing that yesterday because she had to write a report. So we were talking about that, and she was just staring at a blank page, and she got so upset about it because it triggered her anxiety, and it does the same for me. And so I told her what I usually do is I say, okay, just throw a quote or a brain dump or just a little line of something in there. So you got something to go ahead and fill it, just to help with the page, so it doesn't look so intimidating. And it seemed to work, and it works for me too. So are there ways to help, like I said, mitigate that if you have a trigger?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you do for your daughter or your child, because you're teaching them what they can do for themselves, how to self-regulate at a, younger age than we are. And they are learning that now. So that is really amazing. And I honestly, I do the same thing. I just want people to write. So that's why, in my planner, there are a lot of prompts. And in my coaching, we do talk about the emotions. We talk about the project we plan, but then I say, take pen and paper, and now we're going to do some writing. And I can see my clients visibly like sort of getting red patches in their face and around their neck, and just feeling like, oh my God, she's making me write. But then I just ask very simple questions, just something like, what's the main argument? You have 1 minute, whatever comes is fine, go. Or why is the story important? I give you 30 seconds, go. Or who needs to hear this? 2 minutes. I'm going to wait. Just write. And all they are doing is really just generative writing, just, creating some ideas without the whole overblow of, is this going to be good? Typing it perfectly. They just pen and paper. Nicole says go, the timer's on. Okay, I'm going to put something there. And suddenly they are writing. And after a minute or two, sometimes I do that like with 5 different questions, I can see them relax. I can see the shoulders go down. I can see them say, well, I actually do have something to say. And I do know what I want to write. And I just needed to start. And all it took was 5 minutes of a quick question, pen and paper, maybe a timer. It sometimes helps. And just writing, So it's extremely banal, but it's honestly in every single coaching session, this is the magical moment where I say, let's take pen and paper. I have a prompt for you.
I know it sounds so simple sometimes when we say it, because I hear that all the time. It's like, just write, just write. And sometimes that is true. Just take a prompt and just put something, even if it's like a phrase or like just a brain dump. And that's usually what I do, because that helps me so much. And I love that helps your clients too.
There's another thing that I do. I have so many books on my bookshelf. I would just randomly pick a book. If I'm writing poetry, I'll pick a poetry book. If I'm writing a novel, I pick a book, open any page, put my finger blindly on, one line. And whatever that line is, I take that as a starting point. And then I write from there. And it could be completely random. I've done it a million times, and you wouldn't believe I've written quite a few short stories just from a random line that I picked out somewhere, because it got me going. And in the end, I delete that line at the beginning and I've got my own story. And again, that is another way of finding a prompt when you don't want to ask yourself a question. You just go to another author, take a random line, and see where that takes you.
One of my other guests who are on the podcast, she does blackout poetry, and that's exactly what she does. She'll take an existing text and she'll just pick a random word to start with. She'll just say, okay, let's just do this one. And she'll start from there and do blackout poetry and create a whole new poem. And sometimes she says, sometimes they're okay, but she says sometimes she's done some of her best work, like with that blackout poetry from an existing text, just randomly picking. So.
And I think what you're doing there, it's not just sort of like a quick and easy prompt. If we want to be a tiny bit spiritual, I'm not massively, but if you just imagine, that writer and their energy that went into their book and that beautiful poem, and then you can almost just like, you're just pulling a little bit from their energy into yours, and then you use it as a kickstart point, as almost as if that person was your friend or someone, who you can connect to in a sort of weird way, right? And I can, I'm smiling now as I'm saying this, because that brings you into that space that you want to be in for writing, feeling connected, feeling part of the whole writing community, and feeling you're not alone in this. So psychologically, there's a lot of extra stuff behind those prompts and all those tricks that we're trying out.
And it's such a lovely way, like you said, to kind of like for connection, because that's what I think we all aim to do at some point as writers, is the connection portion. And that's just a really unique way to connect with a poem or text or a novel in some way, is to pull that little bit from it. My writing is either feast or famine. That's kind of how I roll. I want to write it all or nothing at all. What are some effective techniques that you suggest helping manage energy and attention when writing?
Oh man, that's probably one of the most important questions, because I work with quite a lot of writers who tend to burn out because they want to go all in They want to spend the whole week, the whole weekend, and don't manage their energy. And especially when you have a day job, but even if not, you can easily get sucked in. I point out to writers that there is a model called the flow cycle. And I learned that from Stephen Kotler in his book, The Art of Impossible. And the flow cycle is based on research. And the idea behind is that we can't just turn on and off flow. Like, we don't have like flow turned on at 8 a.m. in the morning and at 10 p.m. we turn it off and the next day we do the same. That's not how it works. Energy-wise, it could never function. But the flow cycle means that there are 4 stages to get into flow. And the first stage is called struggle. So in the first stage, you are learning something new. You are figuring out a story. It's like when you're learning a language or reading something slightly complicated that goes into your book. So the first stage is struggle, acquiring something new. Your brain is hard at work. Second stage of the flow cycle, and all of these stages are necessary, is digestion. So you need to give it some space, step away from the computer, take a short walk, and let your brain digest whatever that thing was you have tried to get into your head. That is already the first time when you need to take a mini break. Next stage is writing in flow. So you've learned something new or figured something out, you let it digest, and now your brain is ready to let it all go on the page. And that's, of course, the thing we're all craving. It's amazing. We forget time. It's lovely. That's only stage 3. And stage 4, once we've been in writing flow, we've gone all in, we need to take a break and recover. Like our body and brain needs to physically recover from that. It's, I know we're really just sitting at the desk, but it's massive work that we're doing. And so if you just imagine that circle, the flow cycle, there are 2 times when you need to take rest, which is the digestion of your information and recovery. And most writers are trying to jump from struggle directly into writing flow. They want to learn something new. They have a new idea figured out. They want to write in flow immediately and keep writing in flow. This is not going to work. So when I usually explain that to other writers, they say, oh my God, does that mean I'm allowed to take breaks and it's going to be good to get even more flow? And I say, yes, exactly. The breaks are needed because you will generate more and more writing flow and work higher quality and more efficiently if you do take those breaks.
That's what I feel like is one of my biggest challenges as far as a writer is like finding a recovery time. That recovery piece is like, I get into a very productive mode and I'm like, okay, I'm getting out podcast episodes. I'm working on my book. I'm getting all the writing done. I'm doing all the creative stuff. But then with my normal job too, on top of that, I'm like, okay, I can manage all this, but I don't leave any time for recovery in all those small little windows of time I have. So I'm learning to kind of slowly give myself that recovery. Like you said, it doesn't have to be necessarily flow all the time.
Sometimes, especially a lot of the writers that I work with, and again, many of them are women or identifying as women, are very productive in all the areas of their life. They wear a lot of hats, they get a lot done, and it makes you feel accomplished. And there are a lot of demands on us. And we almost feel like we cannot allow ourselves to take those breaks. And I literally have to make lists with the writers that I work with on, okay, what would be a good recovery activity for you? Going for a walk, nature, meditation, yoga, sometimes Netflix. Yeah, that's also fine, but maybe not emails and scrolling through social media because you're just like dumping more stuff into your brain. And we really literally need to make those lists. And then we go through their calendar. For each day, we look for times when there is a chance to take a break so we can honor the flow cycle and give them the break that is really needed to be productive in the long run. And it's really hard. We feel like, oh, I can't take a break. But then when we open the Google Calendar or we open the planner, and we will find those breaks and we will slot them in and we will say exactly what the break will be. And then we can train ourselves to be comfortable with taking a break.
That's actually one of the things I do when I go on writing retreats with some of my writing girlfriends is that we will make a little bit of time to go for a walk around the block just to like take a small break and like just
take a breather, go outside, be with nature, just kind of like enjoy the day, and then come back to the writing. And usually it helps. It helps all of us. And then we get back right into the flow, like you said. I don't think we can emphasize enough how important recovery time is. And like you said, for us as women, sometimes we feel like we don't need it, or it's something we try to put on the back burner, but then we end up burning ourselves out pretty quickly.
Yeah. The tools to avoid sort of burnout are not that massive. They can be simple steps, as you just said, go around the block. And I have had burnout, and I actually quit my previous job as a university lecturer because I had medical burnout. I could not work, leave the house, or do anything. And so that's why I have a little radar, sort of a radar in my head when I work with writers, where I can see the signs. And this is also why in my planner there are a lot of little tools, small questions, check boxes, just very subtly, but in a simple way to avoid that, because that's really something I don't wish on anyone.
It is very hard. It sounds like you've had a very serious like run-in with medical burnout, but and I know I've had a little bit of burnout in the past before, nothing that serious, goodness. But I feel like some of the best tools we can have is being proactive, right? Instead of reactive towards it, kind of mitigate it before it gets serious to that point. Yeah. Little things, like you said, the little things.
And that's very empowering, because you are creating your writing environment. You are creating your rest environment. You are creating that sort of mental space that you need for writing. And I find that empowering and positive. And that's, again, exactly the same space from which you want to write and be creative as well. So nicely, all those things really nicely go together. And all of this boosts the writing in the long run. There's nothing taken away from the writing by doing these steps and setting things in place for ourselves.
I've heard that interruptions are the biggest hindrance to writing. And I find that's very true for me. I'll get intrusive thoughts about laundry or making dinner or walking the dog. And often I find myself, walking away from my writing. With your experience as a coach and a writer, what are good methods to limiting distractions?
I think one thing is trying to set yourself up in an environment where distractions are minimized as much as you can. I know when you work in the home office, or you have, caring obligations and day jobs, sometimes it can't be avoided. But if you can be in a space that's good for you, some people like cafes, some people like a very quiet space. So it helps to write down things that really boost your writing, like 10 things that I know are going to give me flow immediately and boost my writing so I can be, uninterrupted. And then maybe you can make another list of things that keep distracting you. And once you have that, you can think about, well, what can I do just for tomorrow, taking one or two things on board from this list to create a writing space that is slightly more uninterrupted. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that is something I try to do myself as well. I try to tell my children when they are not supposed to come in. Sometimes I pretend I'm in a Zoom call when I'm actually writing, and I say I'm in a meeting, because, writing is not always honored in the same way. But of course, it's never perfect. So if you try to have the perfect writing environment, you're going to fail. So I'm trying not to force that. I think the other thing is, when these intrusive thoughts are coming, oh my God, the laundry, oh, this email I still haven't sent, all these thoughts, just sort of lean back, take a pause, take a breath, maybe write it on a Post-it for later, and just ask yourself, if I don't follow that thought, or if I don't do that activity right now, what is the worst that can happen? And just sort of breathe into it and just create some sort of a calm nervous system. Most of the time, you do not have to immediately do that thing that popped in your head. And if you just take a breath, just let that thought be present. I've seen you, write it on a Post-it, leave it for later. You can sort of go at it gently, I think. Because if I try to force the negative thoughts away from myself, sure, they're going to come and keep nagging. But if I'm, sitting there, acknowledge them, write them down, take a breath, I can let them go. So often it's about letting go and allowing, sometimes it's okay that the thought is coming. Whatever. Yes. Okay. Email thought. I know you. You're a good friend of mine. You can sit here on the side on my desk. I'm just going to go look over here. and keep typing. Thank you.
I do a lot of lists, and like I love to list things out, and it helps me kind of like herd my thoughts all together. And that way too, I know that, okay, I can get to it, but I'll get to it in a minute. Not like right at this second. I don't have to act on it right at this second. And that's what I'm trying to make sure that I'm learning and I'm doing, because if I do list those out, I know it's there. I will do that, but I want to focus on this one task right now.
Yeah, it's a brain dump, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I often talk about how to reframe things and be gentle with yourself, but essentially you're dumping it into your journal, your planner, your Post-it, and leave it there for the time being. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad I'm on the right track than doing this.
You are actually, and that's not just for you, Sarah, but also for everyone listening. Most of the time you are already doing most of the things right.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to think, oh, I need to find this hack and that other trick, and maybe there's a better system. And yes, you can, of course, improve and sort of reflect. But at the same time, just remember all the things you are already doing well, and just let that carry you forward, because that is such a better way of, it's the carrot rather than the stick. So yeah, Sarah, you are doing a lot of things right. I'm learning way more from you at the moment.
Do feel like that we do that a lot. I'm the same way. I love and reading all the books about like how to build the second brain, the Atomic Habits, all those like great, productivity hack books and everything like that. But I feel like most of the time I am doing all the things like you said, but it's either, for me, it's consistency. It's like, am I really getting the most out of this? I don't feel like I am. And I feel like I'm not giving it enough time, and I'm not being as consistent with it. So maybe that's where I'm falling a little short. And it's kind of that struggle of like, well, I don't see the benefits of this. I'm not sure. So I'm just going to stop. But it's, that always getting in our brain. That might be I don't know if that's a woman thing either, but a lot of times I get in my own head quite a bit about it.
Yeah.
So
there's an element of overthinking sometimes around the practice of writing and the art of being a writer and being a creative. We sort of want to do it right and want to do it efficiently. And even if it's not perfect, I mean, I'm a huge perfectionist. But at the same time, we are doing it. You're opening your planner in the morning, you're opening your journal, you're doing it. Yeah. You keep returning. You let go of the negative thoughts. You keep returning. And that's the ticket. That's the thing we need to do.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, I was mentioning I get into my own head quite a bit. Sometimes the negative ideas about myself as a writer, or the imposter syndrome. We kind of chatted about that a little earlier. And that kind of stops me a little bit from putting too many words on the page and start writing again. Is there a way to help boost confidence as a writer, to help give us that, that momentum to get back to it?
Absolutely. So I'll give you the secret of how I start all my coaching sessions. It doesn't matter if it's a group or a one-on-one client. It's not even that secret. Before we even do a lot of talking about the goals and what all the things and the story, I ask them, okay, just give me a second here. What are the 3 wins from the last week? And they journal about it, or they tell me right away. And I can often see them scramble in their head, like wins. What did I achieve? And then I say, well, it's not just wins. If you don't have, if you haven't written like 5,000 words, if you don't have wins, you can tell me learning points and insights from, maybe you slowed down last week, but you had an insight about what doesn't work for you in your writing practice. And suddenly, they might have wins, and they are really happy to tell me and share that thing that I've submitted something, and I've sent off this email to this person that was annoying to me, whatever it was, right? Or they say, well, you know what? It didn't look so good, but now that I'm talking, I actually think this is what I could do better next week. And they have this insight, and they feel like they still gained something from that. And that turns whatever failure they have felt before they came into a session again into a win in the end. And anyone can do that for themselves with a journal at night. As we all know, gratitude journal, I write down 3 wins, and if I don't have 3 wins that I want to celebrate, I write down 3 learning points. And I always feel more accomplished and more in touch with myself, and I feel more positive. And then I take that back, I take that into my sleep, And when I wake up in the morning, I sure feel better.
That is an awesome practice. And one like I think we could all kind of benefit from or even try to utilize a bit. I know I'm kind of trying to get a little bit better about like the grateful journal, like what I'm grateful for, like the waking up and like saying like, okay, what am I grateful for this morning and things like that. So I like that one too, the wins.
And sometimes it's really hard to feel grateful because something may have not gone well, or the world is quite complicated at the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I cannot move into gratitude, either I make it smaller, like what's the teeniest, tiniest, beautiful mini moment I had yesterday, just a breath of delight. If I can't find any of that, I'll just write down, what did I learn? And surely everyone has learned something. And that makes it easier for me to keep up this practice.
That's actually one of my favorite phrases right now is that I'm learning, I'm growing. And that's what I try to tell myself every day is that I'm learning, I'm growing, because I'm not perfect. Because I'm like you, I'm very much perfectionist about things. So I keep telling myself I'm learning, I'm growing every day, and I'm just, getting better.
I love that mantra.
Yeah, I think that's all we can ask, right? Is just trying to be better humans every day. So better versions of ourselves. So we have talked so much about like all these awesome tools and how to like really get those writing goals and try to be, the best writer we can be. So where can listeners find your book and how can they connect with you?
So my planner, you can find it at thewritehabitplanner.com. Very simple. And you can find me on NicoleJanz.com. Just Google me. I'm on all the socials with Janz is writing. So it's just my last name and then is writing. I don't know why I picked that. But yeah, I'm around on the internet. The Write Habit Planner will be on Amazon very soon. As we speak, it might already be there. I'm out there. I'm writing on Medium. I'm on all the socials trying to give value to all the writers. And I'm sure you can pick something that'll be helpful for you and boost your writing in some way.
Thanks so much to Dr. Nicole Janz for joining the show. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. That way you're the first to hear new episodes when they drop. And if you get a chance, feel free to leave a review. It helps support the show and allows more opportunity to bring in all kinds of fantastic guests. There's also a link to the YouTube channel in the description if you'd like to see the interviews with some of the guests and see them show off their lovely books. Book recommendations for this episode: The Write Habit, the Undated Annual Planner and Workbook for Busy Writers by Dr. Nicole Janz, and The Art of Impossible, a Peak Performance Primer by Stephen Kotler. As always, stay safe, be well, and keep writing. Bye!